Yo, welcome back everybody to a brand new video here on the second channel, and Worlds is finally here later today, and it is time to do a meta prediction discussion video for the World Championships 2023. I cannot wait for Worlds. I'm excited to see what decks do well, what people decide to play, and how the meta unfolds. Worlds is usually the time where people kind of bring their secret decks, and I think that's going to be a big factor in how Worlds unfolds this year, but I'm super excited for it all to unfold and what decks will do well and how things play out, because I think this year is going to be pretty crazy and pretty special. There's a lot of decks to talk about right now in our meta. This is a very heavy discussion. There were so many decks I had to include that I had to miss out on a couple because there was just so many different decks to talk about. But if y'all are excited for the meta prediction video and Worlds this year, leave a like on the video. If you're new to the channel, subscribe down below. Help me on the road to reaching 7,000 subs here on the second channel and all that good stuff. With Obsidian Flames coming out also later today, make sure to check back on the Twitch channel and the main channel tomorrow for some Obsidian Flames content. I cannot wait to get on the new content grind and all that good stuff. But without further ado, let's start off the prediction. Now, to start off the prediction, I went with Gardevoir. I still think Gardevoir is one of the biggest decks to beat right now in our current format. Gardevoir has the best matchup spread, in my opinion. I think it's pretty solid against mostly everything in the format, except for maybe a couple decks where it might struggle against, but I think Gardevoir is still one of the BDIFs in the current format. I think Gardevoir has the most room for improvement, too. A lot of people right now are just saying Gardevoir just can't beat a lot of different decks, but I think it's pretty good right now, especially against some of the big decks, if you were to include a couple tech cards. I think the biggest tech card Guardy can play right now is Skyseal Stone. I wouldn't be surprised if we saw Gardevoir with Skyseal Stone perform well at Worlds. I think Skyseal Stone is the best tech card Guardy can play right now because it allows you to knock out those V-Stars. And V-Stars are insanely popular, especially now that Giratina is on the rise. I think Guardy is just a very good deck. I think it's still in a great spot right now. I think a lot of people are really underestimating how good Gardevoir is. It's not seen as much play in the online tourneys, but I still think Gardevoir is just a ridiculous deck right now going into Worlds, and I wouldn't be surprised if we saw one Gardevoir at the very least in top 8. Does Gardevoir have a chance of winning Worlds? Honestly, yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if we saw Gardevoir win Worlds either, but I wouldn't be surprised mostly if it got top 8. My prediction right now is there's going to at least be one Gardevoir in top 8. I think someone's going to pilot it, and again, with the tech cards this deck can play, it can really, tech for what the meta is. Next up, of course, is Tina, which everyone is saying is the best deck right now. Now, I think Tina has the biggest potential to flop, but I also think that it's going to be very popular. I think day 1 of Worlds, we're going to see a lot of Giratina, and then in day 2, Giratina is going to take a massive nosedive in play. I think it's going to start off one of the most played decks day 1 of Worlds, and then day 2, it's not going to convert as well. I still think the deck is honestly really powerful, and don't get me wrong, I'm not sipping the Giratina Kool-Aid just yet, but I know a lot of people are on that Giratina wave, and with its recent hype right now and performance in online tourneys and League Cups and League Challenges, I think Tina has a very high percentage of performing well, but I also think that it does have the ability to flop. I think Giratina will have a pretty big flop at Worlds, but I still think we might see one do really well, at least a couple. There is the possibility it can get top 8. Can Giratina win Worlds? I'm going to say no. Look, last time I predicted Giratina to win a major tournament, it was UIC, and it flopped at a UIC. So no, I'm not saying it's going to win Worlds this time around. I ain't predicting Giratina's winning Worlds. I think it does have a higher chance of flopping. It'll definitely be one of the most popular decks in day 1 of Worlds. I think that day 2 conversion, though, is going to be a little bad, and I think that people are going to realize Giratina wasn't as good as we all anticipated it to be. I think Giratina also has a high percentage of seeing play from Japan players. Giratina is mostly really good in Japan. I mean, even before rotation, Giratina saw a ton of play in Japan. It did really well over in Japan, and then, of course, when we got Giratina in rotation, it kind of flopped, but pretty good chance a lot of the players from Japan will bring Giratina. I think it's going to be one of the most popular decks in day 1. That's my prediction, but then in day 2, I think it's going to drop off a little bit. Next up is Turbo Lost Box. Turbo Lost Box also will be very popular. It's honestly like, I wouldn't call it the safe play for day 1 because you don't want to tie in day 1 of Worlds. That's the big thing. You do not want to take ties. And I think Lost Box, obviously, very big chance they can tie. Tina is a Lost Zone deck, but Tina doesn't tie as much as Lost Box does. Lost Box has a very high chance of tying. Now, there is a decent chance we might see Turbo Lost Box with Kyogre do pretty well, but I'm not sold on Kyogre just yet. I think Kyogre is honestly decent, but with the amount of Iono in the format, I don't know if it's going to be that good. But I do think that Turbo Lost Box is still a great deck for Worlds. I think we're going to see a lot of it in day 2, but day 1, it's not going to be as popular because people don't want to tie. I still think the deck is going to have a good performance at Worlds this year. It's still just an insanely good deck. I think it's got a good matchup against Tina, and I think its Guardy matchup's also decent. So we'll have to see if Kyogre does well. I think a lot of people are expecting Kyogre to make a comeback. I'm going to say that I don't think Kyogre's making a comeback, but I think Kyogre will. I think one Kyogre deck will do well at Worlds, but I don't think we're going to see Kyogre make a comeback at all. I don't think Kyogre is that good right now. I think it's decent, but just I still think straight Turbo Lost Box without Kyogre is just the way to go. There's too much Iono in the format. It's just not enough. But definitely expect a lot of Turbo Lost Box in day 2, and we're probably going to most likely we'll see a Turbo Lost Box deck in top 8. Next up is Lugia. Lugia is getting a lot of hype right now. I think Lugia is the one deck in Worlds that people are really underestimating how popular and good this deck will actually be. Now, Lugia is just really good against mostly everything in the meta, except for maybe Dura, but Dura is falling off, right? And that's a big sign for Lugia to do well. I think Lugia's got a decent matchup against Lost Tina. Lost Tina's not playing Temple of Sinnoh, which is really the only thing Lost Tina can really play to make the Lugia matchup even more winnable. I don't think it has a free Lost Tina matchup, but I think its Lost Tina matchup is decent enough. I think the Urshifu is still the best way to play Lugia right now because it just gives you a good time into the Arc decks, which are very popular still. So yeah, Lugia is a great deck for Worlds. I wouldn't be surprised if we see at least one Lugia in top 8. Lugia is another deck that I have on my radar of a deck that maybe can win Worlds. It is a bit of a high roll deck, obviously. You have to get very lucky with the deck. You have to get, your chops in there. There's also some crazy versions of Lugia going around with 4 Burnett in it, which is kind of absurd, but those Lugia decks are starting to get a little bit of a buzz. So we could see Lugia do well in top 8. I wouldn't be surprised if it got top 8. It's still just a very good deck. It's also a deck that I think a lot of players are really anticipating for Worlds. I wouldn't be surprised if somebody in the top 16 of NA is going to bring Lugia to day 2 of Worlds. Next up is Arctina. Arctina's a very solid deck. I got top 8 in a League Cup with it the other day, and I think that Giratina is just in a great spot right now, both Lost Zone and Arctina. I think Arctina is the safer way to play Giratina. Like, Lost Tina's good, don't get me wrong. Like I said, though, it has a high chance of flopping after day 1, but I think Arctina is a very strong deck for day 1 of Worlds. It's a very straightforward deck. You just go Judge Path, win the game, right? Very simple deck. I think Arctina is just very powerful and one of the best decks in the meta right now. It's also the best way to play Arceus, in my opinion, due to the fact that it just beats all the other Arc decks pretty easily because you have a draw engine and you have, Path and Judge, which can be very hard for the other Arceus decks to keep up with. I think Arctina is a great deck for Worlds, and I'm going to be honest with you. I'm a huge Arceus stan. I have a very, very big suspicion Arceus is going to win Worlds. Like I said, Guardy can win Worlds, Lugia can also win Worlds. Those are the 2 other decks that maybe can win Worlds, but I think we're going to see an Arc deck win Worlds, whether it's Arctina or some other different way to play Arceus, which we haven't seen yet. I do think that Arceus has a pretty good chance of winning Worlds this year, because it won Worlds last year. It almost won NEIC. It almost won all 3 divisions at NEIC. Like, Arc is still on another level right now, and if Lost Tina's conversion rate into day 2 isn't that good, we might see some top players in, the day 2, spot. They might be like, okay, it's time to play a Arc deck. Because if Lost Tina flops, there's a very good chance Arceus is going to pop up again. And again, I think Arc has a good chance of winning Worlds. I don't know what variant can win Worlds. Arctina does seem to be the best way to play it right now, but I do think that we're going to see Arc win Worlds. That's my prediction. Arc is winning Worlds. I don't know what deck. Doesn't matter what deck. It's just Arceus V-Star is going to be in the deck that wins the World Championships this year. Next up is Champao. I think Champao Arceus is the best way to play it right now, but Champao Palkia is also solid enough too, but I think Champao is going to make top 8. It's my wild card pick for a deck that can get top 8. I'm going to say Champao. I think Champao's finally getting the attention and the praise that it maybe should deserve, because it is a very strong deck if it sets up. It is weak to obviously Judge Path, and not having a draw engine in the deck is kind of sus, but I think Champao is honestly a good enough deck to make top 8 at Worlds. Somebody might have that lucky Champao run. It reminds me a little bit of Rideon, where we're probably going to see that one lucky player squeeze into top 8, but I would like to see Champao in top 8. That's my wild card top 8 pick. Of all the good decks in the format, I think my wildcard pick for getting top 8 is probably going to be Champao, because I think Champao, it's finally at the point where people are respecting it. People are building not optimal 60s, but getting close to the optimal 60, maybe the optimal 50, 55 cards for Champao, and I think that's a big deal heading into the World Championships. Next up is Mew. Now, Mew, don't get me wrong, is still the underdog of the format. Yes, Spiritomb is popular, but I still think that Fusion Mew is still a very strong deck, regardless of how popular Spiritomb is. Not every deck is playing Spiritomb. The only deck that really plays it is Arc decks, and maybe Lost Tina plays it. Not guaranteed, though. Not all Lost Tina decks play Spiritomb. So there's a very good chance that we're going to see Mew do well at Worlds. I think there will be a couple Mews that have good runs. Can Mew get top 8? Honestly, yeah. I think Mew is another deck that could squeeze into the top 8. Yeah, Spiritomb is out there, but not every deck plays Spiritomb, and if you're not playing in Spiritomb, then Mew is just also just a good deck right now. It also can donk people. It's still just a very solid deck in the meta right now, and I think that Mew has a chance of getting top 8. I know I'm probably naming more than 8 decks and getting to top 8, but I still think that Mew is one of those decks that will probably get top 8. It just seems like a deck that just always somehow manages to get top 8. And even though Spiritomb is popular, I don't think that's going to deter Mew's run at Worlds this year. Maybe a little bit. Next up is Dura, my favorite deck. Unfortunately, Dura is falling off right now due to the popularity of Giratina. Both Tina and Arctina have a very solid matchup against Dura. But Dura is still not a bad deck. I still think somebody's going to play it and do well with it. I don't know if it can get top 8. Probably not. Honestly, this is probably the only deck that I've talked about so far that won't get into top 8, but I still think that Dura can have a couple good runs, maybe a couple top 32, top 16 placements. Dura is still not a bad deck. If you weave and dodge all the Giratina, I really think that Dura is a good deck still. I mean, it beats Gardevoir, it can beat Turbo Lost Box, it can beat Lugia. Even if they're playing the Urshifu, I still think you're okay against Urshifu. So I really think that we're going to see Dura do decent at Worlds. I don't think it can win Worlds this time around. I also don't know if it can make top 8. It could be a better Day 2 deck, though, to be honest, because, again, if you see that Giratina's conversion to Day 2 is not very good, there could be a reason to just bring Dura to Day 2 at Worlds. So it's probably a better Day 2 deck than a Day 1 deck. I would not recommend playing this deck at all in Day 1 of Worlds, but for Day 2, this is definitely a decent play. So honestly, we might see Dura get top 16. Again, I'm not betting on it again top 8. I don't think the deck is that good anymore, and I also think people have figured it out, but I still think that Dura has a potential to do well at Worlds. Again, more of a Day 2 deck. We just have to see how Giratina does. Rapid Strike's another deck that's kind of a wild card. I still think somebody's going to play it and do well with it. It just is a deck that has to dodge all the bad matchups, and those bad matchups do exist. I think Lugia's popularity right now is very scary for Rapid Strike, and also Mew's popularity can be very, very bad too. Those are your, like, 2 worst matchups. Giratina Lost Box is also a little sketchy, but I still think that it is beatable because you can still, like, Yoga Loop them and stuff. But I don't know how good this deck really is for Worlds. It's kind of a wild card deck where it's probably going to do well. There's maybe going to be one player that does well. I don't think it's going to win Worlds. I also think this deck is going to get top 8 at all, but we might see one Rapid Strike deck in top 16 at best, for sure. And we got to talk about the Champao Palkia deck. So we're kind of getting into the more roguey, under the radar, you know, not super top tier decks. And Palkia is one of those decks that is getting a lot of respect right now. I think a lot of people are really looking at Palkia like this is actually a deck that we should consider looking at. And I think it's a very solid deck. I think that it's got a lot of really cool plays it can make. It's a very powerful deck. Its downside is really that it's very linear with what it does. It does have a couple cool plays with like Greninja and Cologne Cross Switcher. And, you know, the Starmie's kind of cute, and, like, the Champao option is there with Melanie, but I don't think that this deck is, like, super... It's kind of, it's linear, right? That's its downside. Like, I don't know if it's going to be able to beat some decks. I think it's actually got an okay matchup against Tina, because you're faster than Tina. You can maybe chase the Tinas before they evolve. I think this deck has potential to beat stuff like Tina, which is good. This could actually be a really good Day 1 deck at Worlds. I don't know if it's a good Day 2 deck, but for Day 1, this could actually have a decent run. We might see a Palkia deck in top 16 or top 32 at best. Wouldn't be surprised. It's a deck that I think a lot of people are looking at now and, like, going, well, this is actually something we should maybe consider running for Worlds. I don't hate Palkia. I think it's a cool deck. I myself will maybe want to try it out one day. Miraidon. So Miraidon is the deck everyone loves to hate, but it doesn't seem like a bad deck right now. I think Miraidon is kind of in that middle spot where it's like, it's not a bad play for Worlds, but it's also not a great play for Worlds. I don't think this is like a deck that can win Worlds. Like, if you're sleeving up Miraidon for Worlds, don't expect to win the tournament. But you can expect to do okay with it. I mean, it's got good matchups right now. I think its Lugia matchup's decent. I think it actually doesn't have a bad Giratina matchup either. I think it's a pretty solid deck. I think Miraidon is still it's maybe as good as it can be right now. I think its matchup against Champao is also very favored. And having good matchup spreads across the board is good. I mean, yeah, its Arc matchups might be a little sketchy, but we have seen some Miraidon decks start to squeeze in Path of the Peak, which could be something that we see Miraidon start to tech now, is those Path of the Peak. So we'll have to see where Miraidon goes. I don't think we're going to see Miraidon in top 8. I think Miraidon is maybe just a worse Champao, but at the same time, it's still a decent archetype. Maybe one can get top 16. Maybe even a couple get top 16. I mean, there's always going to be that one lucky Miraidon player. I definitely think we'll see a couple Miraidon in Day 2 at Worlds, and I definitely wouldn't be surprised if we saw one maybe squeak into top 16 at best. But I think Miraidon's not a bad deck right now. Its matchup spread isn't terrible. Next up is the Michael Catron Arc Umbreon deck. Now, this is a deck that I think is also in the same boat as Dura, where it seems like it was really good post-NAIC, but now that Giratina is popular again, I think this deck is going to start falling off a little bit. I don't think it's as bad as against Giratina as Duraludon is, because you do have V-Guard energy, which is actually not bad against Giratina, especially when you put it onto your Umbreon or your Pikachu, and they're all very tanky against Giratina, which is nice, but I think this deck is still kind of falling off a little bit. I think that it's kind of hit its peak with NEIC, and who knows, if somebody dodges Giratina, much like Dura, this could have a deep run in the tournament. I think Flying Pikachu is a great card for Worlds, for the record. There's a lot of decks right now that I think Flying Pikachu kind of farms, just saying. I think, like, if I were playing Arctina at Worlds, I would play the 1-1 Pikachu in it. That's why I played in my League Cup deck, because I think Pikachu's just really good right now. Nobody's really respecting it. Nobody really cares about it. Nobody thinks about it, and that's the big selling point of playing Flying Pikachu right now. But yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if we saw an Arc Umbreon deck do well. It's still one of those decks that does well in online tourneys. People are kind of toying around different ways to play these Arc Umbreon style of deck, whether you're playing the Slacking or the Pikachu or whatever their Arc attack you're playing, like Umbreon or Lucario or something. But yeah, I think that Arc Umbreon is cool, and could see one in top 32, maybe not top 8. Or like I said, Arc can win Worlds. Maybe this is the deck that wins Worlds. Next, we got Sableye Charizard, a pet favorite of mine right now. Now, list I got here is not the same one that I did a video on with the Luxray and the Milotic, but Sableye Charizard's kind of an underdog deck right now, and nobody really thinks about it. Now, Lost City's also slightly on the decline. The only deck that really plays it is Palkia and Mew, which, in my opinion, are not going to be that popular. Like, you're not going to expect to see Palkia and Mew in at all. Like, you probably dodge it altogether. I mean, Mew is beatable because you do play the Drapion. Mew's better than Palkia. I think Palkia is probably your worst matchup if you're going to play against any deck with Lost City, but Mew's very beatable because you have Drapion, and that's all you really need to sometimes beat Mew. But yeah, I think that Lost Zone Charizard has the potential to do decent. I think somebody will play it. It's one of those decks that people like to play because it's just always an okay deck. It's never really countered. Nobody really thinks about it. Nobody even really knows how to play against it, or even nobody really expects to see it. So when you're playing against a Lost Zone deck, a lot of the time your instinct is to bench Manaphy and play cards that kind of play around Sableye or whatever, and then your opponent benches a Charizard out of nowhere, and it's like, oh, or your opponent gets rid of a Fire Energy with like a Retreat or something, and you're like, I'm not playing against Randy Greninja. This is a Charizard deck. Oh god, I just put a Manaphy down, and that could be pretty big. There's a lot of really interesting things this deck can do. It can catch your opponent off guard. I think that's the big thing about playing Lost Zone Charizard. We got to talk about Colorless Lugia. This is a deck that is sort of bubbling right now. I think that Single Strike Lugia is better than Colorless Lugia, but Colorless Lugia is still not a terrible deck. There is still some cool plays it can make. I actually think it has a pretty okay Giratina matchup, because if you're playing like heavy Snorlax, Giratina can really struggle against multiple Snorlax. And I think that Single Strike or Colorless Lugia is still decent. Obviously, that auto loss against Dura is kind of awkward, but again, like I said, Arc Dura is kind of falling off. This could be an okay day one deck. The Slack King Path build here, that one late night, it's a really cool take on this style of deck. Whether you want to go, heavy Snorlax with Weird Ear, or whether you want to try out the addition of the Slack King Path engine, be my guest. I think Slack King is a little risky, though, because if you're playing Path, you're shutting off your Lumineon and your Weird Ear, which isn't ideal. But I do think that this deck is kind of cute, and I think the Snorlax heavy build is maybe the better way to play Colorless Lugia, but I could see one Colorless Lugia deck doing okay at Worlds, at least a couple in day 2, maybe. It's a deck that people like to play, and I don't think it's a bad call for Worlds either right now. And then we got to talk about some other Arc decks. So a big one is Arc Reggie Drago. Another really cool deck that I would like to personally see do well. Again, it won NEIC in the Juniors division, and ever since then, it's been getting a bit of buzz online. I mean, people are respecting it. People are playing it to Cups and Challenges and online tourneys, and it ain't doing too bad right now. I would love to see this deck do well at Worlds. I don't know if it can win Worlds. Maybe it can. It does seem like not a worse Arctina deck, but maybe somewhere in the middle of, like, it's very similar to Arctina because it is literally Arc with a Giratina in the deck, kind of. But it does have other attackers than just Giratina. You got Garchomp, Gudra, Dura, Noivern, whatever other dragons you want to play. This deck has it, and I think it's a really cool deck that I would love to see it do well at Worlds. It depends really on those Lost Zone matchups, right? I think the big one is going to be, does it take down Lost Tina? Again, you are effectively like you're a different style of Arctina. So this could beat Lost Tina. Again, I think Arctina's matchup against Lost Tina is okay. And this is kind of like playing Arctina too. So maybe this deck is okay against Lost Tina. I would love to see this deck do well. It would make me very happy to see Reggie Drago get top 8. Again, I think an Arc deck can win Worlds and could be Reggie Drago. That'd be insane and awesome to see. Now, Tingloo's another deck a lot of people are not sleeping on, but a lot of people just be like, what about Tingloo? I mean, I think it was in my last meta prediction video for NEIC, I didn't include Tingloo, and that a lot of people got upset about that. So I'm going to include Tingloo in the Worlds discussion. I think Tingloo's kind of mid. I think the issue with Tingloo right now is it actually struggles a lot against Lost Tina. Lost Tina can just sit there and do Abyss Seeking and then just run you over, and they also play Path of the Peak. So I think Tingloo has a very bad Lost Tina matchup, and that's not great. Maybe for day 2, Tingloo could be a better play than day 1, but I wouldn't play this in day 1. Maybe in day 2 I would play Tingloo, but not day 1 at Worlds. It would just be too risky. Could we see a Tingloo deck do well? Hopefully. It's a cool deck. Wouldn't mind it if that happened. Next up is Arc Aerodactyl. This is kind of like an Arc control deck in, a good way to put it. You got the Yveltal in the deck. You got the Mawile, Tempting Trap. Mawile is another card that's kind of low-key right now that nobody really cares for. And the deck also plays Aerodactyl, which is a good attacker versus other Arc decks, and also pretty good against Lugia if you can pull off the Ancient Star. And I think Lugia is pretty popular right now. This is a deck that actually got multiple Day 2s at NEIC, and it's another deck that people are really not expecting when they're playing against an Arc deck. Like, if I'm playing against Arc and my opponent puts a Fight Energy on their Arc turn 1, I'm immediately assuming I'm playing against Arc Dura, not Arc Aerodactyl control, and that can catch some people off guard. And there's a lot of really cool tricks this deck has: the Box of Disaster, the Yveltal, the Mawile. A lot of really cool plays this deck can make. I think it's a pretty cool deck for Worlds, and honestly, if somebody pilots it properly, this could have a deep run at Worlds. I don't think it's going to win Worlds, per se. It's kind of too gimmicky and could be too flimsy over other Arc decks, but does have an okay shot of maybe doing well at Worlds. Next up is Arc Goo, or Lost Goo, sorry, not Arc Goo. I'm getting my Arc decks mixed. This deck did well at the Asia Open, and that could be pretty big for players who are a fan of Lost Goodra. This is a bumbling under the radar style deck that I think is actually not terrible for Worlds. I don't know if its Lost Tina matchup is spectacular, and that's maybe the one thing that'll, hold this deck back, is can it beat Lost Tina. But I could see somebody play Goodra and do well at Worlds this year. It does seem like an okay deck for Worlds. I mean, I like the idea of Sableye. I think even Sableye might be optimal. Zamazenta's okay too, especially against Champao, which could be popular, and it's also good against Arc too. So I don't know. I think Goodra's kind of a cool deck. I wouldn't mind seeing Lost Goo do well. I think it's better than Arc Goo, but I definitely wouldn't be surprised if we maybe saw a Lost Goo get a Day 2 at Worlds. Next up is the Arc Gyarados. I wanted to mention this deck. I did a video on this deck, and somebody actually won an online tourney with it the other day, and I wanted to quickly mention it because it's a cool idea. Again, these wacky Arc decks could pop up at Worlds this year because Arc seems to do well at Worlds, and Arc Gyarados doing well at Worlds would be awesome to see. This is obviously an energy control deck, but the cool thing about playing Arc with Crushing Hammer is how good the Crushing Hammers are against other Arc decks specifically. And with Arc's popularity right now, it's pretty good to play Crushing Hammers. So I think Arc Gyarados could do well at Worlds. I would like to see it do well at Worlds. It's a really cool deck that has a lot of really cool plays it can make. It's a really fun deck that has a lot of really strong combos with energy removal, and energy removal is really good against almost any deck except for probably Gardevoir is the only deck, and I guess Lost Box, but you're probably going to be Lost Box anyways with how tanky you are. So I would love to see this deck do well at Worlds. It's a really cool deck that seems to be a pretty sick idea, and that, I don't know, man, I'm just saying, at one online tourney, I see the hype in this deck. I did a video on it. I like it. Let me talk about Gengar, another deck that randomly got a bit of hype here near the end of the format that could do well at Worlds. I wouldn't put money on it. I think Gengar's in a weird spot where it could do well, but also probably will underperform Day 1 if somebody plays it. I don't know if it can get Day 2. It is a really strong deck that has a lot of really cool plays it can make. Its 1-hit KO potential is insane. Its typing's not bad. I mean, if you're playing against Mew exactly, bro, you're going to farm Mew all day. With a couple tweaks, we could see Gengar do well, like, again, more boss. I've seen some people start to incorporate Tyranitar V in their Gengar decks to help the Lost Zone matchup a little bit, which I actually don't even hate either, so I don't know. Gengar having a deep run would be kind of cool. I don't think it'll happen, but it'd be cool. Darkrai is another weird dark deck that it did well at NEIC. Ross Cawthon played it to NEIC and got Day 2 with it. And somebody could play to Worlds and get a pretty high run in Day 2 also. It's another deck that runs really hot. I mean, in a Guardy heavy meta, this is probably better than in a Lost Tina heavy meta, but this deck doesn't even have the worst Lost Tina matchup in my opinion. The Box of Disaster, the 1-hit KO potential, how fast the deck is. It's faster than Giratina, and that's pretty important. Arctina is probably a harder matchup, but I think I would love to see Darkrai do well. I wouldn't be surprised if we saw one Darkrai deck do well in Day 2, or at least make Day 2. United Wings, I mean, it was cool for NEIC. It was more of an NEIC deck because it just so good against Guardy and Mew, which were very popular. And unfortunately, with how popular the Lost Zone engine is right now, I can't see United Wings doing well at all. If somebody plays it Day 2 that qualified for Day 2, cool, but outside of that, I don't think this deck is going to do well at Worlds. I don't think we're going to see a single United Wings in Day 2. I would love to see it happen. The deck's really cool, but I just don't think it can happen right now with Sableye's popularity. And then finally, I wanted to mention Reggies, another deck that randomly popped up at the end of the format because it did well in the Asia Open, but I definitely think that Reggies is an interesting archetype that I don't think it is like that good. I don't think it's as bad as United Wings per se. I don't think it's that good, but I do think that it's a really cool archetype that could have an okay run at Worlds. It could get Day 2. This is, in my opinion, the wild card Day 2 deck. Out of all the decks that can get Day 2, this is my wild card pick. I think Reggies is a really cool deck that I would love to see get Day 2 at Worlds because it's a cool deck that is very underrated right now. Well, I don't think it's great. It's not as bad as United Wings. I still want this deck to do well. It's slightly underrated. It actually has a pretty good matchup against Arc decks, and its Lost Tina matchup isn't bad either. Obviously, the big downside of the deck is can it even beat the Lost Zone deck because of Sableye being pretty awkward for the deck, but I don't know, man. I would love to see Reggies do well at Worlds this year, and it's a deck that could slip under the radar. it could have that one underrated run, and that is my day 2 wildcard pick for Worlds. But there you have it. That is my Worlds meta discussion. I am super excited for Worlds. Well, Obsidian Flame's coming out the same day. That kind of deters the excitement. I still think Worlds is going to be a fun time because this is where people really pull out all the stops. People really do pull out all the stops for Worlds this year. Like, we're probably going to see Sander invent some kind of new control deck. We might even see some other cool Arc deck do well, or maybe some cool way to play Guardy, or some different version of Lost Box do well. And who knows? That's the crazy thing about Worlds. Everybody pulls out all the stops for Worlds, and that is going to be the big deciding factor. And I'm excited to see what people bring to Worlds. There's definitely going to be some decks I didn't even mention on this list that will have a good run at Worlds because, again, it's where everyone pulls out all the stops. Can't wait for it. I'm excited and hope to see you all there in Twitch chat. Maybe I'll do a watch party too. I'm thinking about doing a watch party for Worlds too, but I am streaming Obsidian Flames that day, so I don't know if I'll have the energy to do that. But anyways, hope you all enjoyed the video. Let me know what you think about Worlds this year. What deck will do well? Do you have any wild card picks for top 8 or day 2? Love to hear down below in the comments below, and I'll see y'all later. Bye-bye.